Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York-based jazz pianist and composer Eldar Djangirov. He talked about his latest 2020 CD called Rhapsodize. It is his 11th album and a follow-up to the World Tour Volume 1. He's originally from the old Soviet Union, Kyrgyzstan-born, and started playing the piano when he was 3 years old. His family moved to the United States when he was 10 years old, and he relocated to Kansas City. He talks about growing up in Kansas City and all the experiences he had here. During that time, he built a reputation as a child prodigy. He was on Marian McPartland's award-winning NPR jazz show, Piano Jazz, one of my favorites, when he was only 12 years old, the youngest performer to ever appear on her show. He was signed to Sony Masterworks at the age of 17, and he has been traveling and making music ever since. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I've always really enjoyed your work, so it's an honor and a pleasure to finally get to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate your support and the kind thoughts, you know.
Absolutely, man. So let's start off with your latest CD, Rhapsodize. It's a great, great album, as all of yours are. So give me an idea from your words and your thoughts. What was your artistic vision with this project?
I didn't record a studio trio record for kind of a while before embarking on Rhapsodize. It was the 2013 release called Breakthrough. That was my last trio studio record, and so this was kind of an important moment for me. Like I was combining different songs from different years at that point. You know, there were certain songs that I wrote up until, you know, a few months before the record, and there were songs that I haven't recorded that were a couple of years old. But even though they were a couple of years old, they had a chance to go through a certain metamorphosis through the years, which was kind of a positive. This record kind of covered a lot of time, if that makes sense, and that's sure. on the most fundamental. It covered time, and that's what something that's special about this record, that it covers a certain amount of time that I don't think any other record in my catalog really covers to that extent.
So speaking of your catalog, this is your 11th. When you look back on all of these albums that you put out, do you see it as an evolution of you as a musician? Do you see it as kind of a snapshot of what you were doing at the time? How do you view your collective artistic output as a solo recording artist?
Well, there are certain albums that mark certainly the evolution of... I think everything marks an evolution. I think everything has been a growth for the most part. And I don't think there's really a record, if I go back to, that I think that the growth was... in any way negative. It's always been in a certain upward trajectory in terms of how the music has evolved, how the compositional element has evolved, how the heart has evolved. There are certain elements that are present today that most likely weren't present when I was very young. They're kind of closer to what my heart would speak, certainly on this record, than, let's say, if I was very, very young, if I was in my even late teens or something like that, you know. Yeah, I think it's definitely an upwards trajectory, and the idea is that you capture something that builds, and I don't think Rhapsodize is a record that could be done without me having gone through those experiences, good or bad, about recording music and composing music and playing music in a way that is captured on Rhapsodize. It's something that has to. There's a lifelong commitment to how that expression comes about.
Give me an idea of where you were born and raised, and kind of how you got into music.
So I was born in 1987 in the former Soviet Union at the time. So I must have been one of the last people born in the former Soviet Union before it collapsed 4 years later. I grew up in Kansas City. My parents moved. The whole family moved to Kansas City, and Kansas City had a lot of musicians. And at that point, I've been taking lessons from primarily from my mom, because she's a piano teacher. Music is something that caught my heart early on. I felt in it when I was young, and I just at one point just sort of decided to continue doing it. I guess I could have stopped at any point, but something kept me glued to the music. And now that I'm older, I think I realize what glued me to the music. It was a sense of, probably a sense of therapy on some level. It's probably a sense of sanity. The music involved so many different aspects of the mind. It involved your heart, it involved your mind, it involved your physical apparatus of your body. It just kind of involves all the senses that seem to create a very almost a therapeutic element. And I think the older I got, the more it became that way. So that's why I always kind of stuck with music, and music is such an important part of my life, because it's quite possibly the most important thing to me.
So one of the first songs you remember hearing and playing to was Sea Jam Blues, but on a broader sense, what jazz musicians really swayed you early on and kind of inspired the way you would play or how you would approach the craft?
Oh yeah, there were many. Oscar Peterson was certainly, that's the Sea Jam Blues recording that I remember hearing that just kind of really had an impression. People like Chick Corea had a pretty profound impression on me when I was young. I remember hearing a couple of records that were on repeat for a long time. Bill Evans was another one that was pretty primary for me. There were kind of snippets of other musicians that I would listen to that were. We're just talking about piano players, but there were certainly musicians that were not piano players that influenced me profoundly. But there was other piano players, other musicians that I would listen to, and after a while, it almost became that if I listen to something, there's always something that you could take within the realm of active listening, and so listening then becomes kind of something that you do every day, to help you, inspire you, and then hopefully when you go back, you're implementing in your own way. You're not really trying to go back and do something that other person did. You're just kind of taking a very small bit of something that you learned, and that's, I think, what listening is all about. It's just learning sometimes even very subtle things that you can implement.
One of my favorite shows as I was getting into jazz for years was Marian McPartland, and you were one of the youngest to ever appear on a show. That had to be a huge moment for you.
Yeah, that was a pretty big moment for sure. I guess it was surreal. I think it was surreal on two levels. It was surreal because she was an important figure in the music. Later on, also in the yeah, and I was very young at the time. That made the whole experience very surreal to me too. Because of my youth.
Talk to me a little bit about the Kansas City years. Those seem like they were very formative years in your development, not only as a musician but as a person. Give me an idea of what it was like to be here in Kansas City, and kind of now that it's in the rear view, how do you feel about Kansas City?
I feel great. I mean, Kansas City is overall, there's still a kind of a piece of Kansas City that I carry with me all the time. It's a city that I really associate with being at home on some level, even though I don't live there anymore. But it was a largely positive experience, and there was a lot of music happening at the time that I was living there. Because the music was so strong there, especially for a city scene, so to speak, I don't think that really exists that much anywhere else in other cities, or I really haven't seen it on that magnitude, except maybe New York City. I mean, obviously New York City has, which is where I live today, that has a pretty strong scene, but there's something about the scene that was happening in Kansas City. It was a close scene between musicians. It was closely knit, which is a primary difference between that and a scene of New York. I don't think New York City is closely knit. It's broad and it's big, and there's a lot of things happening, but the community level of at least what I perceived for the music to be in Kansas City was definitely influential. And there was just good musicians doing good music that you could just kind of learn from. Just watching them, I would learn things. I remember, somebody who would be really kind of important in the formative years, and we played quite a bit together when I was really young. Was a drummer named Todd Strait there, and he still lives in Kansas City, and he's really talented and very skilled. And just being able to be in the room with him when I was young and play duo or something like that, or be at a venue and play with him. It was definitely turning me on to certain subtleties in terms of trio interaction that were very formative and very and influential.
The one thing that I always find interesting about the world of jazz, there's so many different paradigms that go into the whole of it, and one of them is the kind of the prodigy realm. And I think about someone like Joey Alexander, who started so young and everybody was bespeckled by what he was doing, and now he's getting older and there's more maturity and there's more of this. I have a feeling just looking at his picture that, I'm not a kid anymore, I'm getting more established. And I know with you by 17, when you signed on to Sony, you had 2 albums, you were on Marian's show when you were 12. When you look back on your life and starting as young as you did, what's kind of your overall reflective feeling on your career and how it started early and where you're at in New York now at your age? How do you feel about how everything has kind of materialized for you?
I think the Joey comparison is probably chronologically a bit less accurate because I didn't really start touring until I was like 18. Whatever kind of shows that I played when I was younger than 18, they were more, they were kind of rare, and they were mostly delegated to the local kind of Kansas City area, which I think makes a difference. There's a big difference between touring when you're like, I honestly can't imagine touring when I'm 13. It would be super heavy. I think, even when I started touring at 18, I think even as an 18-year-old, there were things that I wasn't aware of, or things that and there's a lot of musicians that I know that play when they're, early 20s or early teens. And even then, there's a lot of formative things that need to be placed at that point. I never toured at 13 or 12 or 14. I could say I just couldn't imagine it. That's all I can say.
Sure.
I don't know what it would be like, and I wouldn't wish that upon myself to go back, because I remember how difficult it was even at 18. There were things that happen when you're 18 that are happening out of pattern, that they're not happening to most 18-year-olds. And when you're 18, you kind of realize that. And even through that self-awareness, you're dealing with certain elements that there isn't kind of like a guiding principle that somebody can walk you through it easily. And even if they're guiding you, they don't really know because they haven't lived through that. So they're still kind of going based on their experience. And so my experience was touring at 18. I think I would wish myself to go back and tour earlier. No way. No way.
I guess kind of piggybacking off of that, and I ask a lot of old musicians that are in their 60s and 70s if you could go back in time to your younger self. So I'm going to ask you that. If you happen to have a dream tonight, you run into your 18-year-old self, and you can give yourself one piece of advice that you've, incubated and acculturated over all of these years, what would be the most profound advice you would give your younger self?
I think in our cultural paradigm, a lot of times we delegate the word instinct to the realm of mysterious and unreliable. And I think it's kind of a shame that that's happening because, there's been neurological reports written about the fact that, so much of our instinct comes from a specific part of our brain called the limbic system. And the limbic system is something that we happen to share with other animals. Animals actually go completely on the limbic system. And when we're interacting with a dog, for example, a lot of your interaction is through that instinct. And a lot of times we sort of overshadow things in our cultural paradigm, and we think through certain things that don't feel instinctual and whatnot. And I would say that the only biggest part of the advice is that it has to do with that instinct, and maybe more overall, it has to do with colloquially when people say follow your heart, and so there's the slightly technical kind of reasoning behind instinct, and there's more a philosophical about following your heart. And I think those are really, really important, and as you grow older, I think that part becomes activated, and whether we become more and more aware of that part, that will kind of bring a certain kind of peace as we grow and mature. At least that's my experience, and allowing you to trust the heart, and allowing you to trust the instinct, and I think that's been very important. And I think that's the same. It goes the same into the realm of music, because you want to be able to trust those things in the music. And I think music has been always sort of the most important driving force in my life, and then, and it is now. And I might have not consciously been aware of that, but it's always been something that I wanted to tend to, something that I wanted to take care of, something that I wanted to expand, something that I wanted to explore and evolve. And that part has been there, and now I can look at it in terms of instinct, in terms of heart.
What do you like best about being a live performer or a professional musician?
The fact that, even sometimes at its best, sometimes, I was just thinking about last week and having a conversation with a fellow musician about the idea of performance. It's funny because just even the word with the connotation carries performance. I think on some level, just the word and how it's used, it implies kind of like an act, like a performance. When we think about somebody, let's say, behaving in a certain way socially, when we say, oh, that person is performing, it usually doesn't have a positive connotation, because it means that it carries a certain amount of insincerity to it. I think that the moment of performance at its best, the moment of and really carrying music and expressing music, to shy away from using the word performance, I think it's one of the most, it should be one of the most honest moments of your life, and it should be a transcendent moment. It should be a moment that elevates you and transcends you through time and this reality even. And perhaps it's hard to reach that every time due to many different circumstances. It could be external factors that can sway you away from that goal. But if you can elevate yourself, you can elevate the people that you're playing with, and ultimately elevate the people that are watching it, and the people that are tuned in, and you can transcend that moment. It's a very powerful experience, and the word performance almost does a disservice to that, because there's nothing insincere about it. It's one of the most honest moments of life that I could possibly have, if not the most honest interaction. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I dig it. Yeah. So let me kind of get to another level of this. What was one of the first live jazz shows you ever saw that really inspired you, made you think, man, this is it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think when I saw Oscar Peterson for the first time live, I saw him at Yoshi's, and I must have been like 15 or 16. Even though it's coming up later, it was just such an incredible experience to see him live, because I was such a fan from being young. That had a profound effect on me, I think. It's just one of those things that kind of stands out, and I know it wasn't entirely done in, a lot of people have a story about when they were like, pre-teens about a live concert that they saw that. But that one kind of stands out, and I was, I was in my teens, but it still kind of had an effect on me, for sure.
So why do you love jazz?
I think it's just a matter of going back to that thing that I was talking about transcending the moment. and being elevated. That's a highly desirable place. It's kind of a meditation. It's a therapy. I think it's it's a very, in my relative experience, I try to meditate often. That place, that transcendent place, that elevated place is a very, very powerful place in terms of a meditative state. It gives a certain calmness and happiness at its best that is vital. It's crucial to living a harmonious and peaceful life on some level. Without it, it seems to be. Without it, I would have a very large part of me missing, a large part of peace missing. It instills peace. It instills peace in your mind, and it's an avenue that is at the same time you can involve your mind when you're, let's say, when you're composing, when you're crafting an arrangement, when you're in the studio, right? You're involving your mind as well, right? So you have the heart in terms of peace and elevation. You have the mind. You have the athletic element to it of your hands and how tuned are your hands to the music. So then there comes a certain element of almost like a physical exercise. You want to be able to get your hands to be attuned and responsive. So it engages all these different motor skills during the process. So now I think you have the motor skills, you have the mind, you have the meditation all in one, and that's powerful. I don't think there's anything else that I know of that can combine three of those vitally important elements together.
So my final question to you is this. Everyone has their version or perception of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
These are intense questions. I think the older I grow, it's harder for me to separate my everyday reality from the music. I'm so involved in music, in some aspect of music, on a daily basis that it's very difficult for me to take that apart and say, even though I enjoy living life, it's so intertwined that I would be a different person completely if I was not doing music. On another level, I'm just somebody that wants to be a better version of themselves than I was yesterday, and I'm trying to find my peace. That's it. That's
wonderful, man. Hey, man, thank you for opening up. This has been a joy. I appreciate the music, and I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. I hope much success to you, and I hope people keep listening to your show, and thanks.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Eldar for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.